Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Monday, September 1st, 2025, and today we are going to be taking a look at a New York Times article by Nate Cohen, releasing the numbers about the redistricting across a bunch of different states to figure out who ultimately does come out ahead, the Republicans or the Democrats, if all of these states go full steam ahead in redrawing their congressional boundaries ahead of the 2026 midterm elections. Now, this analysis includes a variety of different states and also addresses the current state of the House maps, given that Republicans have already redrawn the state of Texas on the national stage here. A very interesting article with a lot of different insights here, ranging from the impact of Latino voters in different districts, how many seats Democrats would need to win, what it would look like if California redraws and the other Republican states redraws, or what happens if California fails in its redraw. There's a lot of super helpful information here, but I do think that what really does sum it up, and I'm sure you can tell this from the title of this video, is that Republicans redrawing still are not in a great position ahead of the 2026 midterms, and that's honestly exactly what we've known all along. What they've done here is pretty much just understand where on the congressional level do Democrats actually need to perform in order for them to win House control. Well, that answer is quite clear. How blue would 2026 need to be for Democrats to win control of the House of Representatives? Now, Donald Trump initiated this entire redistricting fiasco by asking Texas to redraw their maps. And that's because his team had math similar to this one that showed that if no states had done their redistricting process, Democrats would have only needed to win House control by a mere 0.2% on the national popular vote to actually control the chamber after the 2026 cycle. And that makes sense. What he actually notes in his article, Nate Cohen says that the 2024 election actually was quite fair on both sides of the aisle. Republicans won the national popular vote with about 50% of the vote. Democrats had about 47%, and the seats roughly broke down that way. Democrats were at 215, Republicans were at 220. And although there's a lot of gerrymanders across these states like Tennessee and North Carolina, very clear and excessive Republican gerrymanders, Democrats had some of their own in states like Illinois that had boosted up their numbers, but ultimately, too, Democrats were in fact winning a number of competitive districts that maybe they didn't win in 2022. That's why the House map got a little bit more narrow in favor of the Democratic Party. But taking a look at it nonetheless, the map here was built in a way that in the next cycle, if Democrats were able to win the popular vote, because they had not since 2020, that yes, the House would have swung control in favor of the Democratic Party. But here's where we are. Texas, as the only state that has redistricted officially across the country, stands to be putting the Democrats in a position where now they need to win the national popular vote by 1.6% rather than the 0.2% needed had no states redistricted ahead of this cycle. And that actually puts Democrats in a position where it actually is on track to go back to the Democrats in 2026. Right now, they lead the generic ballot by about 2.5%. It's not massive, and it's certainly not as large as it was in 2018, but it is nonetheless a lead large enough that would usher in Democrats winning back House control if Texas alone had decided to redraw. Now, the map here and the math here gets a little bit better for Democrats if California redraws their map as they are expected to. Democrats would need to win the national popular vote by 0.3%, just 0.1% more than what it would have been at baseline in order to win House control. But here's where it gets tricky. The numbers start to deviate. On the side of if Texas redraws and Ohio, Missouri, and Indiana redraw as well, and Florida does, Democrats would need to win nationally by 3.4% in order to win House control, which is not in line with what Democrats are currently leading by in the generic congressional ballot. What we generally know is that by the time we reach the 2026 midterms, it is the Democrats who probably will see a slight outperformance of these data points. But it's not a great place to be if you are just on the cusp of the maps here, where at 0.2% at baseline, but if all these states draw in favor of the GOP, you have to win by 3.4%. The good news for Democrats, and arguably this is good news for them too, I can near guarantee you Democrats will win the popular vote by way more than 3.4%, because what we've seen in these special elections and in these off-cycle elections, including the 2022 midterms, is that when Democrats are upset or want to turn out in an election, they will. And the likely voter screens are significantly more Democratic than the regular voter screens or registered voter screens, because Democrats are the most likely group to vote in this upcoming cycle. Getting back to this point about what the redraw looks like. Let's say California redraws on the left side of your screen here. If California redraws, Democrats win by 0.3%, they win control of the House. But if Ohio, Missouri, and Indiana redraw their maps, and the Ohio part is a 100% certainty, the courts have ordered that Ohio must redraw. Besides that point, if Ohio, Missouri, and Indiana redraw, which Missouri has just called a special session, near guarantee they redraw. Indiana looks like it's going to do it too. Democrats need to win nationally by 1.6%, and if Florida tackles on, by 2.3%, which the data right now still says that Democrats win control of the House. So this would be showing that, despite the baseline here being quite good for Democrats, I mean, you take a look at the margins here, you shift the entire country by 1.5%, what do you end up with? Well, on the national stage, Democrats narrowly win House control, but they still win House control nonetheless. But a 1.5% shift still give Republicans, control of the House of Representatives, not control, the popular vote victory just narrowly across the country, which is baffling if you ask me. Either way, getting back to this point here, what we can say here is that it will mitigate a lot of these Democratic gains because Texas removed 5 from the Democrats, down to 229. Missouri, Indiana, Florida removed maybe 5 more, down to 224, maybe 220. The Democratic majority inevitably is going to be axed by these decisions and these redraws that the Republicans are doing in many of these states. But arguably, it won't be enough. Now, what is interesting that they mention here in this article about 2026 is that a 2 to 3 point structural advantage for Republicans is meaningful, but it is arguably pretty modest. The 2018 style election, Republicans wouldn't even stand a chance, even if they were to redraw Ohio, Missouri, Indiana, Florida, Texas, and assuming California fails, which chances are it won't fail. A big thing here for the Democrats and the Republicans is that maybe some of these districts that have been drawn are drawn in primarily areas that are largely huge Hispanic voting regions. In areas like Texas, a lot of these newly drawn districts are drawn in areas, it's not going to be seen here, but are drawn in areas that are built in a way that it must contain the 2024 trend lines. Otherwise, Democrats might still be able to win 2 or 3 of the districts that Republicans drew to be overwhelming Republican gerrymanders. A lot of what these GOP maps have really locked in and said and solidified for them personally is that they are working under the assumption of the most previous election cycle. And there's reason for why they did that. The Texas Republicans, I think, largely felt burnt. That after 2012, when they drew the map to have Democrats locked into 11 districts, Republicans having the means of winning 24 to 25 every cycle, take a look at where these maps were, and we can actually compare as to how they shifted. Because by the time they reached the end of the decade, their map nearly fell apart. That if you had just shifted the state's margin by 5 points to the left, Republicans would have gone from 23 seats versus Democrats at 13, a 10-seat advantage, to Democrats having control of the majority of the Texas state delegation. It terrified the Republican Party. And had they decided to do a mid-decade redraw like they did, I'm sure the map would have been more up to date. After the 2016 election, they could have seen all the Clinton districts and drew them in a way. Either way, that's what they're trying to do now. But the problem for Republicans is that a lot of what this math counts on for them, to benefit them, is that a lot of these voters that might have swung overwhelmingly in favor of Trump must remain that way in 2026. If Democrats had, the 2008 coalition, and again, this is the oversight that often political parties don't realize, that in 2008, Obama ushered in such an expansive and strong coalition across this country, Democrats won 257 seats in the House of Representatives. This is the largest majority Democrats had seen in decades, and it was Barack Obama who ushered that in. And that by the time you reached 2010, it was the same exact congressional boundaries, the same exact map. The difference was that a lot of these trend lines and these expectations for Democrats, many of which thought that they would skate to re-election, because in many of these cases, they were winning districts by 72, districts by 100%, that by the time you reached 2010, they were losing, despite 70, 80-point margins in many of these districts. It is fascinating and insane. Democrats, in terms of safe states, districts here had 218 by 15 points or more. 18 races on the Democratic side were uncontested, including in states like Arkansas and Tennessee and West Virginia and Virginia, that by the next cycle, Republicans won, believe it or not. And taking a look at what this map looked like 2 years later. Red, red, and red. All over. A massive, massive Republican swing of 63 seats. Again, because the expectation here, in terms of what it is, in terms of what we've seen, ultimately, was that the trend lines and what we learned in 2008 versus what was reality in 2010 was very, very different. And that's what Nate Cohen really hones in on. That there are times where Democrats have won in districts that they never should have been able to be competitive in the first place. Places like Oklahoma's 5th district, where Trump won by 21 points in 2016 and Democrats were winning it in the next cycle. And thinking about 2026, thinking about what 2024 means for 2026, even on the extreme end, where California fails and 5 Republican states redraw, including 2 of the 3 most populous states in the country, Florida and Texas, redraw their map. Even with that, just a slight victory for Democrats in the popular vote, which is what they've seen in years past, would give them control of the House. And if California, for Democrats, God willing, if California passes a map that benefits Democrats, believe it or not, it is very easy to see how Democrats win House control in 2026. Because it was 2016 where Republicans were at 241 seats to the Democrats' 194. And after all of redistricting, if California passes through, Republicans will have about a 5-seat advantage on the nationwide scale. But keep in mind that it isn't just the 5-seat advantage. On the flip side, if, let's say, California fails, it would be at most 10, which would take the Republican numbers from 220 to a high end of 230, which even in 2016 was still outpacing where the Republicans would be if they broke precedent and redrew 5 of their states. It shows that 2026 is so daunting for Republicans that even in the extremes where they have to cheat to win, they still don't win. They still don't. That's the problem for Republicans, which is why I think they are doing everything they can to get closer to victory. Because I think they're playing for the long game. Because yes, if they redraw the maps in 26, a blue wave would usher in a Democratic victory. But in 2028, the likelihood of a Republican House goes up even more. If Democrats counteract in states like New York and Virginia and other states, then maybe the map starts to narrow down and gets back to where it was in 2024. But the trend line and the headline here for Democrats in 2026 is that based off these numbers and based on the data analysis of what these redraws would do to the map, the answer, not that much. An advantage for Republicans that they did not have going into this election, sure. But that was always understood. If Democrats had not counteracted with this California, they had 5 days to do it, by the way. They had a 5-day deadline. So Republicans actually jumping the gun in Texas, because it ended up being passed way after Democrats broke quorum here. If they had done so smartly, which doesn't always happen, you would find that the Texas Republicans would have passed it later, and Democrats would have not been able to counteract it in a state like California, but now they are. And if they do, even if you hold the election today, where Democrats are at a 2.5% generic congressional ballot advantage, and amongst likely voters, it gets even more in favor of the Democratic Party, 5, 6, 7 points of those who are expected to vote in 2026. Even at baseline today, with this California, which we do believe is going to pass, Democrats still win House control. So, with all these theatrics and all these conversations and all these Republicans showing that they are terrified, fundamentally, and at odds with the 2026 midterms and allowing voters to make that decision for themselves, there's reason for that. Because even in the best case scenario for them where California fails, I still think Democrats win House control. And it is quite rare for this to be the circumstance where Democrats are expected to have such a strong year that they can overcome all these hurdles, constitutional or not, in these states. Republicans are throwing them their way. Either way, the Democrats still come out ahead in 2026. Looks a lot better for Democrats than 2024 did. And so I will be fascinated to see maybe some other states will enter into the fray. Maybe we'll see Kansas has briefly floated the idea of drawing out another district there, but it's going to be really difficult to see that happening. Maybe Nebraska will do it too to try to shore up the 2nd district. Who knows? These are all possibilities, but not super realistic and not really in our discussion right now. Republicans are maxing it out, and they are certainly going for the jugular. but Democrats are still likely to overcome. And looking at the 2026 midterms, it is Democrats who still maintain the upper hand, even if everything goes to plan for the GOP, because Democrats winning by 3.4% is sort of the baseline and the bottom for Democrats in the 2026 cycle, and chances are they'll outperform that. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the top left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video for you to watch, and then a playlist for my 2026 House election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.